Hello friends, this video is about stem cells. In this video, we will be discussing about introduction of stem cells, the properties, a brief history, potency, as well as the types of stem cells. What is stem cell? Pappenheim is the person who coined the term stem cell. A single cell that can replicate itself as well as differentiate itself into many cell types is known as stem cell. So, a cell that can replicate itself at the same time differentiate itself into many cell types is known as a stem cell. And what does differentiation mean? Differentiation is the process of specification. So, what is specification? Specialization means that it has a specific function to do. It may be either transporting certain substances or executing certain tasks. And what does unspecialization mean? Unspecialization means that they do not have a specific structure, nor they do have a specialized function to do. So, a stem cell is unspecialized cell and it gives rise to specialized cells. As we told earlier, the stem cells is able to divide as well as renew themselves. This process is known as self-renewal or regeneration. This diagram explains what is a stem cell. A single cell that can replicate or differentiate into many cell types. That is, it can multiply itself as well as it can differentiate into a red blood cells, a neuron, or etc. This diagram explains that the muscle cells, blood cells, nerve cells, cardiac cells, liver cells, and intestinal cells are arised from the stem cell. These have a specific function to perform. For example, the RBC has a specific function to perform, that is, to carry the oxygen throughout the body, whereas the stem cells doesn't have a specific function to perform. Hence, stem cells are known as unspecialized cells, whereas muscle cells or blood cells or nerve cells are known as specialized cells. So now we are discussing about the properties of stem cells. Any cell that is able to divide and regenerate themselves is called a stem cell. A stem cell is an unspecialized cell and it gives rise to specialized cells. Next, we are learning about the history of stem cells. In 1950, a doctor named McCulloch started to do his experiments with radiation. It was the time of Cold War and it was needed to protect the soldiers from the side effects of the radiation. It was known that heavy radiations resulted to the depletion of blood cells and ultimately resulted in genetic abnormalities. Experiments were done with mice by injecting the bone marrow of the exposed to different levels of radiation. Through this experiment, they were able to conclude that the highly radiated ones didn't give rise to any lumps, whereas the low radiated ones gave rise to many lumps. This showed that the bone marrow were dead in the highly radiated regions, while the low radiated regions, the bone marrow was alive. Through this experiment, it concluded that the transplanted bone marrow cells were able to replicate themselves and also give rise to multiple cell types. Next, we are discussing about potency. Potency has been derived from a Latin word potens, which means having power. And what is potency? Potency is the capacity to differentiate into specialized cell types. So the capacity to differentiate into specialized cells is known as potency. Potency are of 5 types: totipotency, pluripotency, multipotency, oligopotency, and unipotency. The cells that show totipotency is called totipotent cell. Now we are discussing about each kind of stem cell. A totipotent cell is able to differentiate into an embryonic as well as extraembryonic cell type. That is, a totipotent cell is able to differentiate into a whole body. A pluripotent cell is able to differentiate into all cell types, that is, cells that are derived from any of the 3 germ layers. So, a pluripotent cells are cells that can differentiate into all tissues. Multipotent cell is a cell that can differentiate into many cells. That is, multipotent cell can differentiate into closely related cells. The oligopotent cell is capable of differentiating into only a few cells, that is, lymphoid or myeloid cells. Unipotent cells are cells that produce only one type. Totipotent cells are able to differentiate into a complete human body, whereas a pluripotent cell is able to differentiate into all tissues. Multipotent cells are able to differentiate into many cell types. Unipotent cells are able to differentiate into only a single cell type. This diagram explains that an embryonic stem cell is a totipotent cell. This totipotent cell can give rise to pluripotent cells. These are endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. These can give rise to multipotent stem cell that can further give rise to lungs, pancreas, heart muscles, red blood cells, skin, as well as neuron. Now we will discuss about the different types of stem cells. First is the embryonic stem cell. The embryonic stem cell is a pluripotent cell. That is, it can differentiate into all cell types. As we learned earlier, a pluripotent cell can give rise to whole body. These embryonic stem cells are byproduct of in vitro fertilization. That is, the fertilization of the egg and the development until the blastocyst is done in a petri dish. Next, we will discuss about the cord-blood stem cells. These stem cells are isolated from the umbilical cord just after the baby is born. This diagram explains how an embryonic stem cell is created. From a fertilized egg, it develops into a fused-celled embryo. From it develops into a blastocyst. From a blastocyst, the inner cell mass is taken, and the inner cell mass is used for the embryonic stem cell creation. This diagram shows about the umbilical cord stem cells. When a baby is born, the umbilical cord is attached to it. These umbilical cords are further cut, and the blood is collected from the umbilical cord. The stem cells are present in the blood. These are further stored. These are stored in liquid nitrogen at a temperature of -190 degrees Celsius. The cord blood stem cells are used for various diseases. These include blood diseases, cancers, immune system disorders, metabolic disorders, solid tumors, as well as bone marrow failures. Now we will discuss about the adult stem cells. These stem cells are found in the adult body and they are multipotent cells. As we discussed earlier, multipotent cells can give rise to number of related cell types. These adult stem cells are abundant in the bone marrow. The bone marrow is a spongy tissue that is found inside some bones. These are hip and thigh bones. So inside the hip and thigh bones, a spongy tissue is present. This tissue is known as bone marrow. This bone marrow is abundant with stem cells, that is, the adult stem cells. This diagram explains that inside the bone there is a spongy tissue, that is, the bone marrow. This bone marrow has stem cells in them. These stem cells can give rise to red blood cells, platelets, as well as white blood cells. So, next we will learn about the induced pluripotent cells. The induced pluripotent cell is a pluripotent cell that is artificially derived. That is, it is a pluripotent cell that is derived from a non-pluripotent cell. That is, by the action of certain genes, a non-pluripotent cell can become a pluripotent cell. This was first done by Shinya Yamanaka. He reprogrammed a skin cell into a stem cell. This diagram explains that when an embryo is 8-celled, we can create an expanded potential stem cell. These stem cells are used in the creation of placenta, yolk sac, as well as all cells in the body. Blastocyst is used for the creation of embryonic stem cells. These stem cells create all cells in the body. From a non-pluripotent cell, induced pluripotent stem cells can be created. These can give rise to all cells in the body. Hope the concept of stem cells is clear. If you like the video, please like as well as share with your friends. Please do subscribe our channel.